All right, so this is our presentation on why private for profit corporations should be allowed to run U.S. prisons. It is important to begin with a background understanding of what led to privately owned prisons. Many of us grew up with Charles Dickens's story, A Christmas Carol. It was published in December 1843. In the original book, often missing from the movies, is a part where Ebenezer's Scrooge has a nightmare where he sleeps through an entire day. He is panicked as he renders his investments worthless but to be a mere United States security. To those of this time, this reference was applicable. In the 1820s and 1830s, there was exponential growth in the United States as Americans moved across the Appalachian Mountains and began to farm using fertile soil. This impacted the American South, where cotton and sugar cultivation took hold. By 1943, the same year the book was published, American states had significant debt, but perhaps none more than Louisiana. You see, the significant economic expansion that included cotton's emergence and the new demand for credit led to the creation of property banks. These were state chartered banks that used plantations and enslaved individuals as collateral. Several states established this procedure. However, the state that used this operation on a large scale was Louisiana. Louisiana established three banks that chartered with a capital amounting to approximately $21.5 million. You may be wondering what this information has to do with today's topic. The background knowledge of what occurred during this time is critical knowledge in understanding what led to the first privatized prison in 1844. Through a series of events in 1840, the U.S. state debt was over $170 million. The market came crashing down because of this. Overextended states could not make their interest payments to creditors, and the legislators refused to raise taxes. In 1843, Louisiana became one of the 8 states to formally default of their debt. This means that their economic system had completely crashed. Louisiana was in a desperate situation, and the penitentiary became a target for belt tightening. They did not have the funds to properly run the penitentiary. This is why in 1844, the first privatized prison was created. Now, today, compared to today's standards, this was not ethically run. However, based on the morals and ethics of that time, it was acceptable. In 1971, Nixon started the war on drugs. By 1980, the harsher penalties increased the population in state prison for drug offenses by 1,216%. Again, there is no way for the government to be able to afford to take care of all the inmates. It was impossible to properly clothe, feed, and care for the ever expanding population. This is why, in 1983, the Corporation of America, also known as the CCA, was founded. It was the world's first private prison company. At this point, it is important to note that although this is a privately owned company, they are still under certain obligations related to the treatment of individuals in the prison. They are regulated and held to a standard. Some will argue that because CCA is sued often, that this means they are a horrible corporation. However, as Professor Van Geem explains in last week's presentation, the Department of Corrections, both on state and federal level, is the most sued entity within the United States. A lot of people there, a lot of free time, and a lot of gripes to share with the world. CCA continues to grow as more and more states run into the problem of having more inmates than they can handle. In fact, in 1985, a federal judge ordered Tennessee to stop admitting inmates to its overcrowded prisons. This means that criminals were able to get away with anything because they would not go to prison. At this point, CCA did offer to help Tennessee and even said they would pay them so that they could go in and set up a prison of their own. However, at this time, Tennessee denied this help. They did later agree to having a private owned prison. As of 2021, the number of privately owned prison population for Tennessee was 6,828. Although the CCA is well known, they are not the only privately owned prisons. In 1987, Wackenhut Corrections Corporations, now known as GEO Group, got its first federal contract. There is also Core Civic Management and Training Corporations and LaSalle Corrections, to name a few. In 1999, there was 12 for-profit firms. Then, between the years of 2000 and 2018, there was an increase of inmates in these prisons by 32%. As of 2023, there were 158 private prisons in the United States. This growth demonstrates the need for these private prisons. In several of the previous presentations, the issue of overcrowding has been mentioned. I will go into this further, but one possible solution to this critical problem are the private prisons. Now that you know the history and some of the foundational reasons for private for profit prisons, I will go further into the benefits related to these types of prisons. Private prisons offer innovative programs that lower the rates of re imprisonment. We all have heard the theory that once someone is in prison, they will always go back. There are claims that this is because all they do is sit around and eat. They are bored out of their minds, and there isn't a lot of rehabilitation. However, with private prisons, the imprisoned individual are taught a skill or a trade. They are given opportunities to learn something new and improve their lives. This gives an opportunity for those who are in prison to learn that they can make a difference. We previously learned about the positivist school of thought, where there are reasons that criminals do what they do. It focuses on what led the individual to make the decision they did. Were they raised this way? Do they know there is a different way to live? Were they just desperate, or did they want to behave in a specific way? Private prisons allow their inmates to learn that they can impact their environment and show them a different way of life. In simpler terms, it is like how children who do chores are more resilient, can overcome challenges more easily, and are more natural problem solvers. That translates to adults as well. We are empowered when we feel like we have a purpose or the ability to change our actions. Through innovative programs offered by private prisons, incarceration persons are given the same opportunity. They can learn that their identity doesn't need to be based on their mistakes. This principle is called a self fulfilling prophecy. When individuals feel like they are labeled a certain way, then they will behave that way. If a student is told they are bad and can't pay attention, it doesn't matter whether this is true or not, they will make it true. Can you imagine being held accountable for your worst decision or mistake? In regular prisons, this is what incarcerated persons feel and are taught. But when they are shown that they have just as much worth and the ability to succeed and change as anyone else, they are given a new lease on life. As mentioned previously and throughout the semester, there is a critical problem of overcrowding. This was mentioned in the presentations related to the death penalty. The group that supported the death penalty explained that with so many waiting in prisons, other prisoners are being released onto the streets because there's no room for them in the prison system. As of 2023, the United States had about 1.8 million incarcerated persons. The US incarceration rate is nearly 104% above capacity. In the last 40 years, there has been an increase of 500%. In a minute, I will go more into depth about the determinate overcrowding causes. For now, I want to point out that the private prisons are a viable option to decrease overcrowding. Overcrowding in prisons can cause or worsen mental health problems and increase the rates of self harm, suicide, and violence. Because of the recent overcrowding, there has been an increase of medical issues in prisons, especially regarding mental health illnesses. Many states cannot afford to build additional prisons to manage overcrowding, so they turn to alternative measures to help reduce the prison population. The overuse of pretrial detention and the incarceration of individuals for minor, non serious offenses are significant factors contributing to high prison population rates. Overcrowded facilities, along with associated issues like lack of privacy, can lead to or worsen mental health issues and contribute to a higher incidences of violence, self harm, and even suicide. Private prisons don't have to deal with as much bureaucratic red tape, so policies and procedures can change much faster and with great effect on those receiving care. This means they can focus on reintroduction to a society, which in turn lowers the prison population by reducing recidivism. An example of this is private prisons in New Zealand and Australia. Some prisons have to deal with the government that if they beat the government owned prisons at cutting recidivism, then they receive a bonus. The prison is designed for rehabilitation. The strengths of these public private partnerships is that they can bring the best practices and innovation from all over the world, allowing local authorities to benefit from not only private capital, but also from the best people and the best practices from other countries, says Oliver Brosi, chief executive of the John Laning Investment Group, which built a prison in New Zealand with such contract. Some of the main opposing arguments against for profit corporations are that they are immoral, they do not provide the same correctional services, programs, and resources as bureau run facilities, and they do not save on costs and require more money compared to bureau run facilities. To start, many argue that prioritizing profit leads to dehumanizing practices and is morally wrong to make profits off human incarceration. When the primary goal is financial gain, the well being of inmates may be compromised, undermining ethical treatment and rehabilitation efforts. However, on the other hand, we can see that the profit motive can drive innovation and improvement in prison management. For profit prisons may adopt new technologies and practices that enhance operational efficiency, ultimately benefiting the inmates through better services and conditions. Although the competitive nature of the private sector can lead to better outcomes, facilities that fail to provide humane treatment risk losing the business. Encourage them to invest in quality services and rehabilitation programs to attract contracts from state governments. The second thing that people argue is that for profit corporations lacked correctional services and programs. They argue that to maximize profits, private prisons may cut costs by reducing funding for healthcare, educational programs, and rehabilitation services. This can lead to poor outcomes for inmates compared to public facilities that are obligated to provide comprehensive care and support. If we look at empirical studies, we find that this is not the case. It is hard to find a difference between for profit facilities and government owned facilities. In fact, private companies may introduce innovative management practices and technologies that improve prison operations and inmate rehabilitation programs. This can be better out this can result in better outcomes for inmates and increased safety within the facilities. The last argument is that for profit corporations cost more than bureau run facilities. While, while proponents argue that private prisons save money, critics contend that the full costs, including oversight, contract management, and potential liabilities, are often overlooked, making them less cost efficient than public facilities in the long run. However, if we look at the empirical studies, we find this not to be the case. In fact, in the long run, for profit corporations actually cost less money to run than a bureau run facility. While critics raise valid concerns about potential hidden costs, proponents of for profit prisons argue that their ability to operate efficiently, focus on cost savings, and provide needed capacity can lead to overall cost effectiveness. With proper oversight and regulation, private facilities can potentially reduce the financial burden on taxpayers while still maintaining adequate care and services for inmates. All right, so let's recap what we have learned and put some key points together. In 1999, there were just 12 for profit prison firms, but from 2000 to 2018, the inmate population in these facilities rose by 32%. By 2023, the U.S. had 158 private prisons, indicating a growing need for them. The number of private prisons in the U.S. grew from 12 in 1999 to 150 by 2003, reflecting a 32% increase in the inmate population between 2000 and 2018. The increased number of private prisons indicates their perceived necessity in addressing prison overcrowding and capacity issues. Overcrowding in a public prison can cause or worsen mental health problems and increase rates of self harm, suicide, and violence. Private prisons offer innovative programs that lower the rates of re imprisonment. This growth emphasizes the reliance on private prisons as a potential solution to overcrowding. With effective oversight and regulation, private facilities could alleviate the financial burden on taxpayers while ensuring adequate care and services for inmates. Although there may be various arguments against for profit organizations, private companies have the potential to implement and innovate management strategies and technologies that enhance prison operations and inmate rehabilitation programs. This can lead to improved outcomes for inmates and greater safety within facilities. America has the highest prison population in the world, with 2.2 million people in prison. When a person breaks the law and is convicted, imprisonment has long been the primary consequence of the U.S., managed by various levels of government. However, the cost of maintaining prisons is pretty significant, over 80 billion annually, which then prompts debates on alternative approaches, such as private prisons. Private prisons are known to be significantly more cost efficient. On top of that, the privatization of prisons has potential to alleviate overcrowding, enhance safety for both inmates and staff, and reform the flawed government operated prison system. A big advantage is cost efficiency. Proponents claim that private prisons can operate at lower costs than government run facilities due to the competition, leading to more effective management and resource allocation. Additionally, privatization can help alleviate overcrowding in public prisons by providing extra capacity, which can result in safer conditions for both inmates and staff. Private prisons also implement specialized rehabilitation and vocational programs designed to reduce recidivism, equipping inmates with skills that may assist in their reintegration into society. Moreover, the flexibility of private companies allows for the implementation of new technologies and practices more rapidly than government institutions, enabling a quicker response to the changed needs of correctional environments. Many private prisons operate under performance based contracts that tie compensation to outcomes, encouraging a focus on rehabilitation and reducing recidivism. By outsourcing prison management, the governments may also be able to allocate resources to their other critical areas of the criminal justice system, such as prevention programs and community based initiatives. Finally, some advocates argue that the competitive nature of private prisons foster accountability, as companies must meet contractual obligations to avoid penalties or the loss of contracts. While these points highlight the potential benefits of privatization, it is essential to recognize that this issue is complex and remains controversial, with the significant arguments against it as well. All right, so that was our project. I would like to thank everyone for listening, and I hope you have a great day.